Good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the BLSI philosophy series. And it's great to see so many people actually physically back in the room, as well as seeing so many of you online, which is great. So hopefully we're back to some form of normality, despite the fact I'm going to be talking about the end of history today. Okay, so I wanted to do something that is impossible. And I thought, should I do it? Should I not? And I thought, well, why not? So here is Hegel's philosophy, his universe in a nutshell, to paraphrase Hawkins, to paraphrase Shakespeare. Okay? So here we go. So if you bear these things in your mind for the rest of the presentation, I don't think we can go far wrong. So one is, reality is the process of perpetual change. Reality is not a state of affairs, of objects and subjects. Reality is the process of change in itself. And for Hegel, it's history that changes. So what changes? And so that's change. What changes is Geist, or spirit, or mind. And we come on to what that means later on. And then the next question is, well, if it's mind that is changing, why is it changing? And the reason why mind is changing is because it is alienated from itself. And what that means is that spirit, or Geist, is finding contradictions in its being, in its evolving nature, that it needs to clarify. Things like free will and determination. Things like the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do. It's encountering these all the time. And that's alienated because it doesn't see it part of itself. It sees it as other. It's not part of itself. So that's why it's changing, because it's trying to find its true essence. How is it going to change? And that is the dialectic. Now, the dialectic goes back a long way. So I think the first reference to the dialectic probably goes to Socrates. And Socrates, as most of you know, in sort of 5th century BCE, in Athens, started breaking down the harmony that existed within Greek society, which believed in the gods and things were preordained and things happened for reasons, etc. And he started arguing with the citizens of Athens to clarify certain notions. And he was in the agora, and he was accosting people and saying with questions like, what is justice? What is progress? What is love? And then get into an argument with them. And over the sort of question and answer session, that's the dialectic, questions forwards and backwards, and basically made them to realize that they didn't actually know as much as they thought they did. Because all of a sudden they had to think about contradictions in their own thinking. So, and Hegel, many years later, actually felt that the Athenians were right to condemn Socrates to death because he did introduce new gods to the Athenian population, which are basically the individual. And he was also corrupting the young because he introduced new notions as find out yourself, question the existing narrative, etc. So that's the later Hegel. The earlier Hegel would have disagreed. So that's the dialectic, and we come on to that, explain that in a bit more detail. And we ultimately end up with absolute spirit or Geist, which basically means that the spirit, and we come on to defining what that means, realizes all the contradictions that it previously experienced within itself are all part of itself. And there are no further contradictions to be had. And that's the holism within Hegel. So that is the one slide that gives you the progress and the process in his philosophy. So what is meant by spirit? Some people translate it. Spirit is a difficult word because spirit is also woo type of connotations, from the rising from the dead. He doesn't mean that. What he does mean is spirit in terms of the zeitgeist. The spirit of the age in terms of how society thinks, treats, believes in things, how it actions things. And that's why a spirit can sometimes be translated as mind, which is how does humanity, how does But he does mean humanity at large. How does it think about itself, and how does it progress, therefore? The other thing is about an idea. It's another way of translating it, the phenomenology of idea, because he feels that actually ideas are the driving force for change. And we come on to Marx later on, where he believes Marx is much more of a materialist, who actually believes it's the physical conditions, economic and social conditions that are important. And they start the whole thing off. Whereas actually Hegel thinks it's ideas that lead to action. It's the idea, and initially, people move the world because of ideas and beliefs. That's the starting point of the process, and it goes on. And also consciousness, so collective consciousness could be seen as spirit or the essence of spirit. So those are some of the nuances that he's playing with. But what is interesting is that actually this historical process applies to everything. So it isn't just history going from one day to another. Hegel isn't interested in that at all. It is actually a progression over time from a spirit being a individual consciousness conflicted with itself to a collective consciousness, and then developing into the absolute spirit where it sees there is no contradictions within itself anymore with reality. But it applies to everything. He applies this to society, he applies it to politics, economics, religion, nature, freedom, knowledge, art. I mean, you could go on. And the reason why he's able to do that, because he's not talking about states of affairs or facts. He's talking about how the world, how the universe unfolds itself in terms of a process. And that process of the dialectic, which we come on to next, is the way that things progress. So it has equal force in all of these different areas. And this is why Hegel probably has been the most significant philosopher, certainly since the 19th century, in terms of actually having a real impact on the world as it is. Because, out of that comes Marx, out of that comes communism, out of that comes National Socialism, out of that comes existentialism, and we'll cover all of that very briefly, just to give you a bit of a context. Because it's a process, how the world works, as opposed to states of affairs. Now, a lot of people misunderstand Hegel, and lots of professors and academics also see Hegel as having constructed this huge system, all-encompassing system of totalitarianism. And I think that's wrong. And Hegel himself says, I have not developed a system. I have purely outlined a process, how the world moves. And that is all he's trying to do. So people think he's a systemizer. I don't think that's the case. And hopefully I can convince you by the end of this lecture. Good. Oh, somebody else needs to come in. There you go. Okay, so Geist, we're talking about that again. So we talked about the mind, idea, consciousness, and essence. It's always changing and evolving in the world. So for other philosophers, including Kant, there are certain things that are innate and permanent, like human nature and consciousness. The way we can be conscious of the world in 2000 BCE to 2000 CE doesn't change. We have the same consciousness, we've got the same capacities, we've got the same organs, etc. For Hegel, that is wrong. Even the way we are conscious as human beings changes over time. Even the way we can think about reality changes over time, because it's based on what has gone before. Yes, we are already locked in to some extent of the current narrative, and also in terms of how we can explore alternatives. We're already sort of on a journey. And it's moving from the individual, which we talked about, individual consciousness, to the collective or overall collective. And it's an evolution of zeitgeist. Now, he thinks it is progressive, and we talk about progress because, we're sitting here and we're looking at the news and we don't think we're being particularly progressive at the moment. We seem to be regressive. And I think it's very important to look at his definition of that. basically the spirit is all about an assimilation of difference and reconciliation of the differences within spirit. It culminates, as we talked about, the absolute spirit, and I talk about in a bit why the word absolute has been misinterpreted and misappropriated by both the left and the right, because that's not what Hegel meant by that. And I think as far as consciousness is concerned, consciousness being aware of its own consciousness as the nature of all reality is for him the end point of the process. It's not the end point of history, because history will go on, but the way we conduct history, once we collectively, spirit, has come to the conclusion that it is all of reality, we will approach things differently. So no, it doesn't mean that history's come to an end, but the way we deal with how we shape the future and see the present is going to be very different. It's going to be more encompassing than it is confrontational. Then the final thing is rationality. I think another term that Hegel uses to explain this is all the rational is real and all that is real is rational. So he equates rationality with reality. But the rationality that he's talking about is not an abstraction. So again, you ask some people, what is rationality? Well, it's an abstract concept. And when we get to this, he doesn't mean that. He means rationality is something that has been considered in the concrete, in reality. Somebody's actually thought of something in detail rather than just accepting it as true.